everyone. So this video is going to address carbohydrate versus fat, as well as RQ. So let me start with the RQ. The respiratory quotient is an assessment of how each person is using carbohydrate and fat for energy, and it's a reflection of what they are eating within their diet. So when I measure someone's metabolism, their RMR, I get an RQ on everybody, and it's reflected in terms of a ratio. So 0.82 to 0.85 is considered a mixed macronutrient diet, and that is the ideal R value for somebody. That reflects back to about a 55 to 60% coming from fat, and the rest of it coming from carbohydrate. We are never going to rely a lot on protein for energy production. That is really only going to happen during times of severe stress, things like cancer, burns. Protein is our building block, our building nutrient. Fat and carbohydrate are our two primary substrates that we're using for energy production, okay, for ATP. So I get that value on everybody. And when I look at it, what I'm looking at is to see what, number one, what the ratio is, what the percentages are for fat and carb, because it tells me how someone naturally eats. It gives me an idea as to what the balance of their diet looks like. When I have people coming in who are avoiding carbohydrate because they think carbs are evil and it's causing their weight issue, then their R value is going to be low. Okay, it's like 0.77 to 0.8. When which means they're relying heavily on fat for energy production. If I get somebody coming in who's eating carbohydrate, but then has a lot of fat in their diet, they're eating a ton of nuts, avocado, peanut butter, chia seeds, flax seeds, oil, their R value is going to be low because the presence of fat is giving the body the energy source to make that the primary nutrient to run metabolism and burn calories. So not only is it a reflection of how somebody is eating currently, it gives me an idea as to what their daily habits look like, regardless of what they tell me. Now, that being said, I usually tell people that I can manipulate that R value based on how I feed them. You know, I can feed them in a way, a certain calorie level and a certain macronutrient balance to support an R value within the ideal range. There are some people that even despite doing that, their R value doesn't change. And it just means that that is their natural chemistry, whatever it may be. Okay. I mentioned calories, so let me just throw this out there. The other thing that can throw the R value down, okay, make it trend down, is if you're under eating by so much, like let's say your metabolism is 1900 calories, but you're only eating 1200. Right there, that's a 700 calorie daily deficit below the RMR, not accounting for any structured exercise or other activities of daily living that someone might be doing. So their energy deficit is way too big. And so the body is starting to conserve its fuel from what is being ingested and trying to utilize the dietary fat for energy. And that is also something that will drop the R value. Now, what's the application of all of this? There really isn't one, okay? That's just the bottom line. It's an assessment tool. It gives you a snapshot, an idea, a picture as to somebody's chemistry and what their diet composition looks like. That's it. You're not going to plan or do anything based on the R value. Now, I like having the R value because I like seeing that. I'm a very data-driven person. I'm a data-driven practitioner. So the more data I can have on somebody, the better, in my opinion. But again, the application component is none. It's non-existent. Okay. Let me go through my questions here. Let me make sure I covered everything on the R value. How does it relate to energy balance? RQ doesn't relate to energy balance, like, at all. It doesn't, it's not a factor in the energy balance equation. RQ and heart rate activity. Okay, someone threw that question out there. Can we use RQ in relation to heart rate? No. The only time that the RQ is really relevant with the heart rate and activity is when you're doing a VO2 max test. And this is more sports nutrition based, but I'm just going to explain it to you really quick. Again, RQ is the level at which you're burning fat versus carbohydrate, right? That ratio. When you're doing a VO2 max test and you're assessing someone's capacity to utilize oxygen during activity, you are measuring their heart rate as well as what their body is using as a primary substrate. As the intensity goes up, you're starting to rely more on carbohydrate. So there's something known as the lactate threshold. And the lactate threshold is the point at which the body starts using all carbohydrate for energy production. And you're starting to produce lactate, and those levels are starting to go up. So you get the lactate threshold from a VO2 max test. And if you can have a high lactate threshold, it means you can go longer using fat as an energy source, which means you're increasing your capacity to use oxygen during aerobic activity, which means you're delaying fatigue, which improves performance. So, you know, the RQ at rest from a metabolism test is not applicable. The RQ during a VO2 max test is extremely applicable because you're getting the lactate threshold. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about that. All right. All right, let me go into carbohydrate versus fat then. So a lot of you pointed out some of the inconsistencies in the textbook, some of the stuff that was written about carbohydrate versus fat in terms of intake and fat storage. And all I'm going to say, I'm not going to bash the text, okay? But what I am going to tell you is that it's a textbook. It doesn't mean it's the most up to date. It doesn't mean that they used all the research available. And it can be biased based on the person who's writing it. There's some textbooks that are completely unbiased, and there's some textbooks that are biased. You have to take it with a grain of salt. Know that it should not be the be-all, end-all. It is not black and white. Your job as a student and then as a practitioner, as a health educator, is to challenge everything you hear. Who's saying it? What gives them the right to say that? What's their training? Who are they being influenced by? Who's funding whatever study is being done? You always have to come back and keep asking those questions until you get to the very bottom of it and you feel like you have objective, unbiased information in order to formulate your own opinion about something. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about that. Now, carbohydrate versus fat in the diet, and energy production and fat storage. So I'm going to simplify this really easy for you. You store fat when you're in a calorie surplus. It doesn't matter where those calories come from. Those calories can come from fat. Those calories can come from carb. It is very difficult to store protein as fat. So it's very, very difficult to over ingest on protein, put yourself in a surplus from protein only, and store fat. And there is research to prove that. And that's because the thermic effect, the metabolic cost of processing and digesting that protein is so extreme that by the time your body is done processing it and getting rid of it, you've ended up burning off most of the calories that you ingested in excess from that protein. Okay? The other thing with protein, it's very difficult to convert amino acids into fat, into triglycerides. It just doesn't happen. Those extra amino acids, if we don't excrete them, end up going into the blood amino acid pool, and they end up circulating until our bodies need them. Okay, so that's what happens with excess protein. With carb and fat, it doesn't matter where the excess comes from. It doesn't matter if the excess is coming from whole grains, from sugar, or from fat. Excess is excess. If we are not burning it off, then we're storing it. So a lot of people, when it comes to weight management, will say, well, sugar creates an insulin response, and you never want to eat sugar and carb in a deficit because you're just promoting fat storage. That doesn't even make sense. If you're in a deficit, how can you be storing fat? Right? Just think about that. If you're in a deficit, does the insulin response really matter? Don't we need insulin? Don't we need to have an insulin response to grow muscle? It's the degree to which we're producing insulin. So if you're eating a ton of carbohydrate at one time, right, and you didn't just go do a crazy lift session that was extremely intense, let's say you've been sitting on your butt all day at your office, and then you go eat 100 grams of carbohydrate, are you going to store some of that? Maybe. But if at the end of 24 hours you're in a deficit, then no, you're not going to store it. Okay? It comes back to the deficit. It also comes back to your activity patterns. For people who are super active, it's very difficult for them to store carbohydrate as fat if they're burning it off. Right? Just think about it. Just think about the logic behind that. Now, let's think about the calories per gram. In carbohydrate, there's 4 calories per gram. In fat, there's 9 calories per gram. It's easier to put yourself in a surplus by eating more fat. It just comes down to nutrient density, calorie density. It's that simple. It's not the presence of fat itself. It's the caloric cost that comes with that fat that can promote fat storage. Okay? Let me go through my questions here. Okay, so I hope that simplifies that for you. Fat versus carb oxidation for weight loss, or a substrate for ATP production. Essentially, what are you burning during energy, and does that matter? When you exercise, what's the point of exercising? Let's pretend we're not athletes. Let's pretend there's no performance gains, okay? Let's pretend we're exercising to burn calories and just be healthy. Well, I just gave you the answer. The point to exercise is to burn calories, okay? If you want to burn all of your calories coming from fat, you have to stay in the fat burning zone, which is low intensity exercise, which means you have to do a lot of exercise in terms of time, minutes, to burn a significant number of calories. Because you're working at such a low intensity, you're not burning a lot of calories, even if they're coming from fat. When you work at a higher intensity, you're burning more calories from carb, if not all of it from carb. But you also have a tendency to burn more calories in less time. Remember, it comes back to the deficit. It does not matter what you're burning as the substrate. What matters is how much are you burning in terms of calories over the course of 24 hours, over the course of the week. What's your average look like? It does not matter what you're burning. Now, I know some people said, the obese people to have a harder time liberating fat, getting lipolysis to be oxidized, or lipolysis to occur in order to oxidize fat. So maybe, you want to manipulate the exercise training to make sure that we're promoting fat burning in obese people. Again, you guys, it comes down to the deficit. It comes down to the deficit, and it comes down to preventing adaptation to exercise. You want to constantly change the stimulus on the body, prevent your body from adapting too much, because adaptation results in fewer calories burned, right? That's the goal with performance nutrition, is to improve the efficiency. With weight loss, fat loss, we're trying to keep people inefficient. We want them turning into calorie burning machines, which means you need to change up the stimulus, okay? You want to change up the intensity. So don't worry about what you're burning as a substrate. You just want to burn calories. Okay. think I covered excess carb not stored as fat. Okay, someone had said, what if glycogen is full? Why are fat stores unlimited? So if your glycogen stores are full and you're not using those glycogen stores with activity, then carbohydrate could be stored as fat, because if the exercise is not there, then you're in a calorie surplus. That's what we're assuming, right? If you're in caloric balance or caloric deficit, then your intake is matching your output, or you're burning more than you're putting in. So even if your glycogen stores are full, you're going to end up using that glucose, that carbohydrate, so then it won't be stored. Again, it comes down to the energy balance equation. Are you in a surplus, or are you in a deficit? Why are fat stores unlimited? I don't know the scientific answer to that question. You know, I think it just comes down to the physiology of the adipocytes. There's no ceiling limit. They can expand and expand and expand. And it's really just how we're designed as a species. We're designed to be able to store a lot of fat for survival. So again, if you're stranded in the woods or stuck in a boat in the middle of the ocean for weeks or months on end with no food, then you should be able to survive. That's the anthropologic answer for you, I guess. Okay. I think I covered all of those questions. I addressed RQ, I addressed carb versus fat substrates for ATP production, for energy expenditure, for weight loss. We talked about fat storage. Okay, I think I covered all of that. So again, be looking for another video for more answers.